I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped out onto my driveway that frigid February morning in Naperville, Illinois, and saw the empty space where my two 50-pound bags of ice melt should have been sitting against the garage door. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a chemist at a specialty materials company just outside Chicago. I've lived in the Willowbrook Estates subdivision for 3 years now, ever since my divorce finalized and I needed a fresh start. The house is a modest 3-bedroom colonial, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Well, mine and the bank's for another 27 years, but you get the idea. I'd bought those bags of ice melt just 2 days ago from a commercial supplier because the stuff they sell at the hardware store is garbage. As someone who works with chemical compounds daily, I knew exactly what I wanted. Calcium chloride pellets with a specific corrosion inhibitor that wouldn't damage my concrete driveway or the metal threshold of my garage door. But more importantly, these weren't just any bags of ice melt. These came from a batch I'd personally helped develop at work during a side project last year. We'd been contracted by a local distributor to create a premium de-icing product, and I'd added a proprietary tracer compound to every batch we produced. It was a security measure, something that would let us track our product if it ever got diverted or counterfeited. Each batch had a unique identifier, invisible to the naked eye but easily detectable with the right equipment. The bags sitting on my driveway had been stamped with batch number CX4472MB, and I had the documentation to prove I'd purchased them. I stood there in my winter coat, my breath fogging in the 10-degree air, staring at the spot where $200 worth of ice melt had been. The weather forecast called for another snowstorm that evening, and I'd specifically bought the stuff to prep my driveway and walkway. I looked around the quiet cul-de-sac, but it was barely 6 in the morning. Nobody was out yet. Our neighborhood had a few package theft incidents over the past year, but stealing ice melt seemed ridiculous. It wasn't exactly a hot commodity you could flip for quick cash. I walked down to the street and checked the curb, thinking maybe someone had moved them as a prank. Nothing. I checked my security camera footage on my phone, scrolling back through the night. The camera faced my front door and caught just the edge of my garage, but at around 11 p.m., I saw movement. A figure in a puffy winter coat, someone shorter, maybe 5'4" or 5, walking up my driveway. The camera angle wasn't great, but I watched as the person bent down, grabbed one bag, walked off screen, came back a minute later and took the second bag. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I noticed something. The coat looked familiar. It was one of those expensive North Face parkas in burgundy, and I'd seen that exact coat recently. My mind raced through the past few days, and then it hit me. Deborah Patterson, the HOA president. Deborah Patterson was everything you'd expect from an HOA president in an upper-middle-class Chicago suburb. She was 52 years old, had short blonde hair styled in that specific "I want to speak to your manager" wedge cut, drove a white Lexus SUV, and treated our neighborhood covenants like they were biblical commandments. She'd been on my case since I moved in about various violations. My grass was a 1/4 inch too tall in July. I'd left my garbage cans visible from the street 15 minutes past the designated time. My mailbox needed repainting. The list went on. I'd paid my fines, fixed the violations, and tried to stay out of her way. But Deborah had escalated things last month. She'd cited me for having an unapproved decorative element in my front yard. The unapproved element, a small Japanese maple tree I'd planted near my walkway. Apparently, it wasn't on the approved tree list from 1987 when the subdivision was established. I'd argued that the list was outdated and restrictive, and I'd refused to remove the tree. She'd threatened daily fines. I'd threatened to lawyer up. We'd reached an impasse, and the HOA board was supposed to vote on it at the next meeting. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the timing seemed suspicious. I saved the camera footage and decided to do some investigating before making accusations. That evening after work, I drove through the neighborhood slowly, looking at driveways and walkways. The snowstorm had started around 3 p.m., and most people had already salted their paths. When I turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, 3 streets over from mine, I saw it. Deborah's house, a large 2-story brick colonial with white pillars, had a pristine walkway and driveway. Not a trace of snow or ice. And there, stacked neatly against her garage door, were 2 50-pound bags of ice melt. Even from the street, in the dim evening light, I could see they were the same industrial-grade bags I'd purchased. The supplier used distinctive green and white packaging with orange lettering. I parked across the street and watched for a moment. Deborah's Lexus was in the driveway, and lights were on inside the house. I thought about confronting her right then, but I needed to be smart about this. If I accused her without proof, she'd deny it and probably hit me with harassment claims or more HOA violations. I drove home and went straight to my home office. I kept meticulous records of everything, a habit from my years in laboratory work. I found the receipt from Hendrickson Chemical Supply, dated February 10th, showing the purchase of 2 50-pound bags of Arctic Shield Premium Ice Melt, batch number CX4472MB. I also had photos I'd taken of the bags when I'd unloaded them from my truck, something I did for insurance purposes after the package thefts in the neighborhood. The photos clearly showed the batch number printed on the side of each bag. Now I needed to confirm that the bags at Deborah's house were actually mine. The tracer compound I'd added to batch CX4472MB would fluoresce under UV light at a specific wavelength, and it would also show up on a spectroscopic analysis. But I needed a sample. The next morning, Saturday, I waited until I saw Deborah leave her house around 9 a.m. She was predictable, always went to her Pilates class on Saturday mornings. I grabbed my UV flashlight from my work bag, put on my coat, and walked over to her house. I looked around to make sure no neighbors were watching, then quickly approached her garage. The bags were still there, stacked against the door. I knelt down and pulled out a small pocket knife, making a tiny puncture in the corner of one bag, just enough to get a few pellets out. I caught them in a plastic baggie, sealed it, and then stood up. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "What the hell are you doing?" I turned around and found myself face to face with Deborah's husband, Gerald. He was a tall man, maybe 6'2", wearing reading glasses and a confused expression. He was holding a bag of groceries. My mind raced. "Oh, hey Gerald, I was just checking out this ice melt. Deborah mentioned she found a great brand and I was curious what you guys were using. My driveway's been a mess with all this snow." Gerald looked at me skeptically. "You walked 3 blocks over to look at our ice melt." "I was out for a walk anyway," I said, trying to sound casual. "Trying to get my steps in. Thought I'd swing by and see what you were using." "This looks like commercial-grade stuff." Gerald shifted the grocery bag to his other arm. "Yeah, Deborah picked it up somewhere. I don't really keep track of that stuff. But maybe don't go poking around our garage without asking, okay, Marcus?" "Right, yeah, sorry about that. I should have knocked first, my bad." I gave him an apologetic wave and started walking back toward the street. "Marcus," Gerald called after me. I turned around. "Is everything okay between you and Deborah? She's been pretty worked up about that tree situation." "Honestly, Gerald, I don't know." I'm just trying to live my life and follow reasonable rules. The tree thing seems excessive to me, but I'm willing to work it out." He nodded slowly. "She can be intense about the HOA stuff. It's like her whole identity sometimes, but she means well." I doubted that, but kept my mouth shut. "I'm sure we'll figure it out. Have a good weekend." I walked back home, my heart pounding. That had been close, but I had the sample I needed. Back in my garage, I set up a small testing area. I took out my UV flashlight and shined it on the pellets I'd collected from Deborah's bag. Under the specific wavelength, they glowed with a faint blue-green fluorescence, exactly as they should. The tracer was present. But to be completely certain, I needed to run a more detailed test. I spent the afternoon in my garage, using some equipment I'd brought home from work over the years for personal projects. I ran a spectroscopic analysis on the pellets, and the results were unmistakable. The chemical signature matched batch CX4472MB perfectly. The ice melt at Deborah's house was definitely stolen from my driveway. Now I had proof, but I needed to figure out my next move. I could call the police and report the theft, but would they take it seriously? It was ice melt, not a car or jewelry. And Deborah would probably claim she'd bought it somewhere and I was harassing her. I needed a more strategic approach. That evening, I sent an email to the HOA board. There were 5 members: Deborah as president, a vice president named Tom Reinhardt, a secretary named Linda Wu, and 2 at-large members, Patricia Holmes and David Keller. I'd met all of them at various neighborhood functions, and while they generally deferred to Deborah, they seemed like reasonable people. The email read, "Dear HOA board members, I'm writing to report a theft that occurred on my property on the evening of February 10th. 2 bags of commercial-grade ice melt were stolen from my driveway, captured on my security camera. The stolen items are valued at approximately $200. I have identified the location of the stolen goods and have scientific evidence proving ownership. I wanted to inform the board before taking further action, as this matter involves another homeowner in our community. I'm requesting a special board meeting to address this situation. Please let me know your availability this week. Sincerely, Marcus Chen." I didn't mention Deborah by name, but I figured the implication would be clear enough to make people ask questions. I hit send and waited. Within an hour, I got a response from Tom Reinhardt. "Marcus, this is a serious accusation. Can you provide more details about who you believe has your property? We can arrange a meeting for Monday evening if that works for everyone." I replied, "I'd prefer to present all evidence at the meeting rather than via email. Monday evening works for me. Thank you." Over the next 24 hours, I received confirmation that all board members except Deborah would attend the Monday meeting. Deborah sent a terse email saying she had a scheduling conflict, but would be available by phone if needed. That was fine with me. I actually preferred presenting my case without her physically in the room. Monday evening arrived, and I drove to Tom Reinhardt's house, where the meeting would be held. Tom was a semi-retired engineer in his early 60s, and he'd always struck me as a fair-minded guy. His house was similar to mine, neat and well-maintained. He welcomed me at the door and led me to his dining room, where the other board members were already seated. "Thanks for coming, Marcus," Tom said. "We're all curious and frankly a bit concerned about what you reported. Why don't you walk us through what happened?" I sat down and pulled out my laptop. On the morning of February 11th, I discovered that 2 50-pound bags of ice melt had been stolen from my driveway. I'd purchased them 2 days prior for $200 from a commercial supplier. I checked my security footage, and found video of someone taking the bags at approximately 11 p.m. on February 10th. I played the security footage on my laptop, angling the screen so everyone could see. The video showed the figure in the burgundy coat approaching, taking the first bag, returning, and taking the second. "Can you identify the person in the video?" Linda Wu asked. She was a slender woman in her 40s who worked as a paralegal. "The face isn't visible, but I recognize the coat. I've seen that specific burgundy North Face parka multiple times in our neighborhood." After viewing the footage, I drove around and located what I believe to be my stolen property at another residence in our community. Patricia Holmes, a retired schoolteacher with gray hair and a grandmotherly demeanor, leaned forward. "You're saying another homeowner stole from you. That's quite an accusation." "I understand the gravity of what I'm saying, which is why I have substantial proof." I pulled out the printed receipt. "This is my purchase receipt from Hendrickson Chemical Supply, showing the date, price, and most importantly, the batch number, CX4472MB. I work as a chemist, and the company I work for actually manufactured this particular batch of ice melt. As part of my work on the project, I added a proprietary tracer compound to the product. Each batch has a unique chemical signature." I could see I had their attention now. David Keller, a lawyer who worked in downtown Chicago, adjusted his glasses. "You're saying you can definitively prove these specific bags are yours through chemical analysis?" "Exactly. I collected a sample from the bags I found, and I ran both UV fluorescence tests and spectroscopic analysis. The chemical signature is a perfect match to batch CX4472MB. There's no possibility of error. These are my bags." "Where did you find these bags?" Tom asked. I hesitated for just a moment, then said, "At Deborah Patterson's house, stacked against her garage door." The room went silent. Patricia's eyes widened. Linda put her hand over her mouth. David sat back in his chair and Tom rubbed his forehead. "Well," Tom finally said, "that's going to be a problem." "I need to be absolutely clear about this," I continued. "I'm not making this accusation lightly or out of spite. I know Deborah and I have had our disagreements about HOA matters. But this is theft, plain and simple, and I have the evidence to prove it." David spoke up, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Marcus, you said you collected a sample from the bags at Deborah's house. Did you have permission to do that?" "No, I didn't." "But the bags are stolen property, my stolen property. I needed to confirm they were mine before making any accusations." "Technically, that could be considered trespassing," David said. "Though given the circumstances, I doubt anyone would pursue it, but we need to be careful about how we proceed." Patricia looked troubled. "I've known Deborah for 15 years. I can't imagine her stealing anything. Could there be another explanation?" "What explanation would that be?" I asked. "The security footage shows someone who matches her description, wearing a coat she owns, taking bags from my driveway. Those bags then appear at her house, and they're scientifically proven to be the same batch I purchased. I'm open to hearing alternative theories, but the evidence is pretty conclusive." Tom pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call Deborah and ask her to join us. She needs to respond to this." He dialed and put the phone on speaker. After 4 rings, Deborah answered. "Tom, I thought I said I couldn't make tonight's meeting." "Deborah, something's come up that requires your immediate attention. Marcus is here and he's made some serious allegations. We need you to address them." There was a pause. "What kind of allegations?" "He's claiming you stole ice melt from his driveway last week. He has security footage and scientific evidence. Can you come over to my house right now?" Another pause, longer this time. When Deborah spoke again, her voice had that sharp edge I knew so well. "This is ridiculous." I'm not dignifying these accusations by rushing over there. Marcus has been hostile to me and to the HOA since the tree issue came up. This is clearly retaliation. Deborah, Tom said firmly, if you don't come and address this, we're going to have to take action without your input. This is serious. Fine, she snapped. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. The wait was awkward. Linda made coffee. Patricia kept shaking her head in disbelief. David reviewed the security footage again on my laptop, making notes on a legal pad. Tom sat quietly, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the last half hour. True to her word, Deborah arrived in exactly 10 minutes. I heard her car pull up, the door slam, and then heavy footsteps on Tom's front porch. Tom let her in, and she swept into the dining room like a prosecutor entering a courtroom. She was wearing yoga pants and a sweater, her blonde wedge cut perfectly styled despite the late hour. Her eyes locked onto me immediately. This is harassment, Marcus, pure and simple. Sit down, Deborah, Tom said. Let's hear what Marcus has to say and then you can respond. I've already heard enough. He's accusing me of theft based on what? Some grainy security footage and his supposed chemical tests. This is absurd. Actually, David interjected, the evidence is quite compelling. Why don't you tell us about the ice melt bags at your house? Where did you purchase them? Deborah's eyes narrowed. I bought them from a hardware store. I don't remember which one. Maybe Menards, maybe Home Depot. I buy supplies all the time for the house. Do you have a receipt? Linda asked. I don't keep receipts for small purchases like that. Why would I? I opened my laptop again. The bags at your house are in industrial packaging from Hendrickson Chemical Supply. They're not retail products. You can't buy them at Menards or Home Depot. They're only sold to commercial customers or through direct purchase from the distributor. Then maybe Gerald bought them. I don't know. This is his witch hunt based on a personal vendetta. Tom held up his hand. Deborah, I need you to be straight with us. Did you take those bags from Marcus's driveway? Of course not. I already told you I bought them. Then you won't mind if we verify that, David said. We could check with local hardware stores for purchase records, or we could have the bags at your house independently tested to verify Marcus's batch number claims. Deborah's face flushed red. You're going to violate my privacy and property rights based on his accusations. This is outrageous. I'm the president of this HOA. I've dedicated years to this community, and you're treating me like a criminal. No one's treating you like anything, Patricia said gently. We're just trying to get to the truth. If you bought those bags legitimately, then we can clear this up quickly. I don't have to prove anything. The burden of proof is on him. Deborah jabbed a finger in my direction. I've already provided proof, I said calmly. Security footage, purchase receipt, chemical analysis. What I'm waiting for is an explanation from you. Deborah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't owe you anything, Marcus. You've been a problem resident since day one. You don't respect the rules. You don't respect the community standards, and now you're making false accusations to try to undermine my authority. Well, it's not going to work. I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Marcus from the community for harassment and violation of community standards. Tom stood up as well. Sit down, Deborah. You don't have the authority to call for a removal vote, and even if you did, we're not discussing that tonight. We're discussing the theft allegation. There is no theft. This meeting is over. Deborah grabbed her purse and headed for the door. If you leave, David called after her, we're going to vote on whether to involve the police. Is that what you want? Deborah froze at the doorway. She turned around slowly, and for the first time I saw something other than anger in her face. It was fear. You wouldn't dare, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. $200 is petty theft in Illinois, David said. It's a misdemeanor, and Marcus has enough evidence to press charges. If this goes to the police, it becomes public record. Is that really how you want this to play out? Deborah stood there for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, calculating. Finally, she walked back to the table but didn't sit down. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight. "I want my ice melt back or $200 to replace it, and I want an apology." "That's it. You dragged me here, humiliated me in front of the entire board for $200 and an apology. You stole from me, Deborah. Yes, it was just ice melt, but it was mine and you took it. You knew it was wrong and you did it anyway. Probably because you were mad about the tree situation. So yes, I want my property or compensation, and I want you to admit what you did." Deborah looked around the room at the other board members. None of them met her eyes. She was cornered and she knew it. "Fine," she said through clenched teeth. "I took the bags. I saw them on your driveway and I was angry about all the problems you've caused with the HOA. It was impulsive and stupid. I'll write you a check right now for $200. And the apology." Tom prompted. Deborah took a deep breath, and when she spoke, each word seemed to cause her physical pain. "I apologize for taking your property, Marcus. It was wrong." The apology was about as sincere as a hostage video, but I decided to take it. "Apology accepted. I'll take that check." Deborah pulled out her checkbook and wrote the check with sharp, angry strokes. She ripped it out and slapped it on the table in front of me. "There. Are we done?" "Not quite," David said. "We need to discuss your position on the board, Deborah." Her head snapped toward him. "What are you talking about? You just admitted to theft from a community member. That's a serious ethical violation. I don't think you can continue as HOA president. You can't remove me. I was elected by the community." "Actually," Linda said, pulling out a binder, "according to our bylaws, the board can remove an officer by a majority vote if that officer has engaged in conduct detrimental to the community. Theft from a homeowner definitely qualifies." Deborah looked around wildly. "This is a setup. You've all been plotting against me." "Nobody's been plotting anything," Tom said tiredly. "You brought this on yourself. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of removing Deborah Patterson as HOA president, say aye." "Aye," said Tom, David, Linda, and Patricia in unison. "Motion carries," Tom said. "Deborah, you're removed as president effective immediately. You'll remain a homeowner in the community, but you're no longer an officer of the association." Deborah's face had gone from red to white. "You'll regret this, all of you. I've kept this neighborhood running for years. Without me, this place will fall apart." "I think we'll manage," Patricia said quietly. Deborah grabbed her purse again and stormed out. This time, no one stopped her. We heard her car start and then the screech of tires as she peeled out of Tom's driveway. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Linda laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Did that really just happen?" "I'm afraid so," Tom said. He looked at me. "Marcus, I'm sorry you had to deal with this. And I apologize on behalf of the board for how Deborah treated you. The tree situation is going to be resolved in your favor. You can keep the Japanese maple." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that. And I'm sorry this got so complicated." "You handled it well," David said. "You had your evidence lined up, you gave her a chance to explain, and you asked for reasonable compensation. A lot of people would have gone straight to the police." "I thought about it," I admitted, "but I hoped we could resolve it internally. I'm glad we did." I left Tom's house around 9 p.m., the check from Deborah in my pocket. It felt surreal. I'd moved to this neighborhood for peace and quiet after my divorce, and instead, I'd ended up in a confrontation with the HOA president that resulted in her removal. As I drove home through the dark streets, I wondered if Deborah would retaliate somehow, but I also felt a sense of relief. The tree issue was resolved. I'd gotten compensation for the theft, and maybe now I could just live my life without constant HOA drama. The next few days were quiet. I didn't see Deborah around the neighborhood, and I assumed she was laying low. Tom Reinhardt called on Wednesday to let me know he'd been elected interim president by the board, and they'd scheduled a community-wide meeting for the following week to explain the leadership change. He asked if I wanted to speak at the meeting, but I declined. I'd had enough attention. The community meeting was held on a Thursday evening at the neighborhood clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of Willowbrook Estates that was used for gatherings and events. I decided to attend, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to support Tom. The clubhouse was packed when I arrived. Word had spread about Deborah's removal, and everyone wanted to know what had happened. Tom stood at the front of the room with the other board members. He called the meeting to order and explained that there had been a leadership transition. He kept the details vague, saying only that Deborah had stepped down due to personal conduct issues and that he would serve as president until the next scheduled election in 6 months. During the Q&A session, someone asked directly what had happened. Tom deflected, saying it was a personnel matter and wouldn't be discussed publicly. But I could see people looking around the room, trying to figure out who was involved. A few neighbors I'd spoken with at block parties gave me knowing looks. After the meeting, I was heading to my car when I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Deborah Patterson, Deborah's husband, approaching. I braced myself for a confrontation, but his face looked more sad than angry. "Marcus, can we talk for a minute?" he asked. "Sure, Gerald." "What's up?" He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I want to apologize for what Deborah did. She told me everything after that board meeting. I had no idea she'd taken your ice melt. If I'd known, I would have made her return it immediately." "I appreciate that, Gerald, and for what it's worth, I didn't want things to escalate the way they did. I just wanted my property back." "I know, and you had every right to press charges if you wanted. Deborah realizes that now. She's been doing a lot of reflecting this past week." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "The thing is, she's been under a lot of stress. Her mother has dementia and is in a nursing home. Deborah's been managing all of that while trying to keep up with the HOA responsibilities. It's not an excuse for what she did, but I think it explains why she's been so on edge." I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. "I'm sorry to hear about her mother. That can't be easy." "It's not. And the HOA thing, it was like her escape, you know. A place where she felt in control when everything else was falling apart. Losing the presidency, it's hit her hard. She's embarrassed and angry, mostly at herself." "Gerald, I don't have any ill will toward Deborah. What she did was wrong, but people make mistakes. If she's willing to move past it, so am I." He smiled slightly. "That's generous of you. I'll let her know. Maybe in time you two can at least be civil neighbors." "I'd like that." We shook hands and he walked away. I got in my car feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The situation had been resolved, relationships were being mended, and life could return to normal. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was in my garage organizing tools when a police car pulled into my driveway. My stomach dropped. Had Deborah filed a complaint against me after all? I walked out to meet the officer, a young guy probably in his late 20s. "Marcus Chen," he asked. "That's me. Is something wrong?" "I'm Officer Bryant from the Naperville Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about an incident involving Deborah Patterson." My mouth went dry. "What kind of incident?" "Mrs. Patterson filed a report yesterday claiming harassment and stalking. She says you've been watching her house, following her around the neighborhood, and making threatening phone calls. Do you know anything about that? What? No, absolutely not. I haven't been anywhere near her house since this whole thing got resolved weeks ago. And I've never called her, let alone made threats. Officer Bryant pulled out a notepad. Can you tell me about your relationship with Mrs. Patterson? I explained the entire situation. The HOA disputes, the stolen ice melt, the board meeting, her removal as president. The officer took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. You have any proof of these events? He asked when I finished. I have the security footage of the theft, the receipt for the ice melt, the chemical analysis results, and the check she wrote me for restitution. I can provide all of that. That would be helpful. Mrs. Patterson's story is quite different. She claims you falsely accused her of theft, harassed her until she paid you off to leave her alone, and then continued to harass her after she was forced to resign from the HOA. That's completely backwards. She stole from me, I proved it, and she compensated me. I haven't contacted her at all since then. You can check my phone records, my GPS history, whatever you need. I've been avoiding her, not stalking her. Officer Bryant studied me for a moment. Mr. Chen, I'm going to be honest with you. This feels like a civil dispute that's gotten out of hand, but Mrs. Patterson is insistent that she's being harassed. I need to document everything and pass it along to detectives. In the meantime, I'd advise you to have zero contact with her. Don't go near her house, don't call her, don't approach her in public. Clear, crystal clear. But officer, I haven't been doing any of those things. This is a false accusation. Then you'll have nothing to worry about. Gather your documentation and be prepared to provide it if detectives want to follow up. He handed me a card with a case number. Reference this if you need to. After he left, I sat on my front steps, my mind reeling. Deborah was escalating things by filing a false police report. But why? What did she gain from it? I pulled out my phone and called David Keller, the lawyer from the HOA board. David answered on the second ring. Marcus, what's up? I explained what had just happened. David listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he sighed. This is problematic, he said. False police reports are serious, but they're also hard to prove. It becomes he said, she said, unless you have solid evidence to refute her claims. I haven't been anywhere near her or contacted her at all. How do I prove a negative? Phone records will help, and if you have GPS tracking on your phone, that could show you weren't near her house when she claims you were. Do you remember when she says these incidents occurred? Officer Bryant didn't give me specific dates, just that it's been ongoing. Okay, here's what you do. Pull your phone records for the past month. Get your location history from Google or Apple, whatever you use. Document everywhere you've been. If you have alibis for specific times, note those too. Create a timeline that shows you've been nowhere near her. I can do that. David, why is she doing this? We resolved everything. People do strange things when they feel humiliated or backed into a corner. She lost her position, lost respect in the community, and maybe she sees this as a way to turn the tables and make you the bad guy. Or maybe she's genuinely paranoid and thinks you're out to get her. Either way, you need to take it seriously. I spent the rest of the weekend compiling evidence. I pulled up my Google location history, which tracked everywhere my phone had been. I printed out my call logs from my phone carrier. I went through my credit card statements to show where I'd been shopping, eating, or doing errands. I even got written statements from coworkers confirming I'd been at work during the times I claimed. By Sunday evening, I had a thick folder of documentation proving I'd had no contact with Deborah. On Monday, I called the non-emergency police number and asked to speak to a detective about the case. I was transferred to Detective Sarah Morrison, who said she'd been assigned to look into Deborah's complaint. Mr. Chen, Thank you for calling. I was planning to reach out to you this week. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning to give a statement? Absolutely. I've also compiled extensive documentation showing I haven't had any contact with Mrs. Patterson. I'd like to provide that as well. That would be helpful. Let's say 9 a.m. The next morning, I met with Detective Morrison at the Naperville Police Department. She was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a no-nonsense demeanor. We sat in a small interview room, and I walked her through everything, providing copies of all my documentation. Detective Morrison reviewed the materials carefully, occasionally asking questions. When I showed her the security footage of Deborah stealing the ice melt, her eyebrows rose. "This is pretty damning evidence of theft," she said. "That's why the HOA board removed her as president. She admitted to it in front of 5 witnesses and wrote me a check for restitution. And you haven't had any contact with her since then?" "None whatsoever. As you can see from my location history and phone records, I haven't been near her house, haven't called her, nothing. I've been actively avoiding her." Detective Morrison leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Chen, between you and me, this looks like a retaliatory false report. Mrs. Patterson filed a complaint claiming harassment, but she hasn't provided any evidence. No threatening voicemails, no text messages, no photos of you near her property. Just her word. And now I have substantial evidence from you showing none of her claims could be true. So what happens now? I'm going to interview Mrs. Patterson again and confront her with your evidence. If she can't provide proof of her claims, I'll recommend the case be closed. However, I should warn you that filing a false police report is itself a crime. If we determine that's what happened here, Mrs. Patterson could face charges." "I don't want to press charges," I said quickly. "I just want this to be over. I want to live in peace." "I understand, but it's not entirely up to you. If she filed a false report, the state can pursue charges regardless of what you want. We take false accusations seriously because they waste police resources and can destroy innocent people's reputations." "I get that. I just don't want this to turn into an endless cycle of revenge and counter-revenge. Let me talk to her first and see where we land." Detective Morrison stood and shook my hand. "Thank you for being so thorough with your documentation. It makes my job much easier." I left the police station feeling cautiously optimistic. 3 days later, Detective Morrison called me. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to update you on the case. I interviewed Mrs. Patterson yesterday and presented her with your evidence. She was unable to provide any proof of harassment. No call logs, no videos, no witnesses. When I pointed out the contradictions between her statement and your documented movements, she became flustered and eventually admitted she may have been mistaken about some of the incidents." "Mistaken?" I asked incredulously. Her words, not mine. "The bottom line is I'm closing the harassment case due to lack of evidence. However, I've forwarded my findings to the state's attorney's office for review regarding a possible false report charge. They'll decide whether to pursue it. How long will that take? Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. In the meantime, I'd still advise you to avoid contact with Mrs. Patterson. This situation is clearly volatile. Trust me, I'm staying as far away as possible." Another month passed. Spring arrived in Naperville, bringing warmer temperatures and the first hints of green on the trees. The Japanese maple I'd fought to keep was budding beautifully. I focused on work, started dating someone I'd met through a friend, and tried to put the Deborah drama behind me. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early April, I got a call from David Keller. "Marcus, I thought you should know. The state's attorney filed charges against Deborah Patterson yesterday. She's being charged with filing a false police report, class a misdemeanor." Wow, I said. I honestly thought they'd just let it go. They took it seriously because her false report could have derailed your life. If you didn't have such thorough documentation, this might have turned out very differently. The arraignment is scheduled for next week. Do I need to be there? Not for the arraignment, but you'll likely be called as a witness if it goes to trial. I'll keep you posted. The case moved slowly through the legal system. Deborah pleaded not guilty at her arraignment and hired a lawyer. Over the next few months, there were pre-trial hearings and motions. Her lawyer tried to get the case dismissed, arguing that Deborah had genuinely believed she was being harassed and therefore hadn't knowingly filed a false report. The prosecutor countered with my evidence showing it would have been impossible for me to do what she claimed. In late June, I got a call from the prosecutor's office asking me to come in for a meeting. I met with Assistant State's Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a sharp woman in her 30s who laid out the case against Deborah. "Mr. Chen, we have a strong case here. Your documentation is excellent, and Detective Morrison's investigation was thorough. However, Mrs. Patterson's attorney has approached us about a plea deal. She would plead guilty to filing a false police report in exchange for a sentence of community service, a fine, and probation. No jail time. How would you feel about that? Honestly, I never wanted her to go to jail. I just wanted the truth to come out and for her to stop making false accusations. If she's willing to admit what she did and accept responsibility, I'm okay with a plea deal." Good. Because the alternative is going to trial, which would be time-consuming for everyone and would air all of this publicly in court. A plea keeps it relatively quiet and gets us a conviction on the record. Deborah accepted the plea deal in early July. She pleaded guilty to filing a false police report and was sentenced to 100 hours of community service, a $1,000 fine, and 1 year of probation. The judge also issued a mutual no-contact order, meaning neither Deborah nor I could contact each other for any reason. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Deborah looked small and defeated at the defense table, nothing like the fierce HOA president I'd clashed with months earlier. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, I want to apologize for my actions. I made serious mistakes driven by stress and personal issues that I shouldn't have let affect my judgment. I took something that didn't belong to me, and when I faced consequences, I compounded the problem by filing a false report. I'm ashamed of what I did, and I accept full responsibility. I also want to apologize to Mr. Chen. He didn't deserve any of this, and I hope someday he can forgive me." It was the first time I'd heard what sounded like a genuine apology from her. The judge accepted the plea deal and imposed the sentence. As people filed out of the courtroom, Gerald Patterson approached me in the hallway. "Marcus, thank you for agreeing to the plea deal," he said. "Deborah's been in therapy working through a lot of issues. Losing her mother last month was hard, but it also freed her from a lot of stress. She knows what she did was wrong and she's trying to make amends. I'm sorry about her mother," I said sincerely. "And I hope Deborah gets the help she needs. I never wanted to hurt her or ruin her life. I just wanted to live in peace. I know, and for what it's worth, we're thinking about moving. The neighborhood has too many bad memories now. Fresh start somewhere else. I understand. Good luck to both of you." True to his word, the Pattersons put their house on the market in August and moved out in September. I heard through neighborhood gossip that they'd relocated to a condo in downtown Chicago, somewhere with no HOA and no yard work. It seemed fitting. Tom Reinhardt continued as HOA president and ran unopposed in the election that fall. Under his leadership, the HOA took a much lighter touch. The approved tree list was updated to include modern species. The bylaws were revised to be less restrictive, and fines were reserved for serious violations rather than petty infractions. The neighborhood felt friendlier, less like a police state. My Japanese maple thrived, its red leaves turning brilliant crimson in the fall. I started dating Sarah, the woman I'd met in the spring, and things were getting serious. We talked about her moving in, maybe getting married eventually. Life was good. One October evening, I was raking leaves in my front yard when a car pulled up. A young woman got out, probably in her mid-20s, and approached me nervously. "Are you Marcus Chen?" she asked. "I am. Can I help you? My name is Emily Patterson. I'm Deborah's daughter." I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes. I set down the rake. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Emily looked around, then back at me. "I wanted to thank you. I know that sounds weird given everything that happened, but my mom needed what happened to happen." She'd been spiraling for years, using the HOA as a way to control something when everything else in her life felt out of control. The theft, the false report, it was rock bottom, but it made her finally get help. She's been in intensive therapy, she's on medication for anxiety and depression, and she's actually becoming the person I remember from my childhood. "I'm glad she's doing better," I said carefully. "My dad told me you could have pushed for jail time but didn't. That meant a lot to my family." My mom is doing her community service at a homeless shelter, and she says it's been humbling and eye-opening. She's learning to see beyond her own small world. So thank you for having compassion even when she didn't deserve it. We all make mistakes, Emily. I just hope your mom continues to heal and finds peace. She is, and she wanted me to give you this. Emily handed me an envelope. She's not supposed to contact you because of the court order, so she asked me to deliver it. After Emily left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on nice stationery. It read, "Dear Marcus, I know I'm not supposed to contact you, so I hope using Emily as a messenger doesn't violate the spirit of the court's order. I wanted to write to you because my therapist says making amends is an important part of healing, and I have amends to make to you. I stole your property because I was angry and petty. I made false accusations because I was embarrassed and wanted to deflect blame. Both actions were wrong, and I've spent the past months trying to understand why I did them. The truth is, I'd lost myself. I'd become so obsessed with rules and control that I forgot about basic human decency and kindness. You didn't deserve what I put you through. You were just a homeowner trying to plant a tree and live your life. I turned that into a war because I needed an enemy to fight. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I'm working on becoming a better person, and I hope that someday, if we ever cross paths, you'll see that change. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I take full responsibility for my actions and their consequences. Sincerely, Deborah Patterson." I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it back in the envelope. It felt like closure, the final chapter of a story that had consumed too much of my life over the past year. I thought about responding but decided against it. The no-contact order was in place for a reason, and besides, there was nothing left to say. Deborah had apologized, she'd faced consequences, and she was working on herself. That was enough. I went back to raking leaves as the sun set over Willowbrook Estates. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. My house looked warm and inviting with its lights glowing in the dusk. Sarah would be arriving soon for dinner, and I'd picked up steaks to grill. Life had returned to normal, better than normal actually. I'd learned that standing up for yourself was important, that documenting everything was crucial, and that sometimes people did terrible things not because they were terrible people, but because they were struggling with demons you couldn't see. The whole saga had started with 2 bags of ice melt, stolen on a cold February night. It had escalated into HOA drama, board meetings, police investigations, and criminal charges. But it had ended with accountability, consequences, and ultimately, a chance for everyone involved to move forward. I'd gotten my $200 back, kept my Japanese maple, and helped catalyze change in the HOA leadership that benefited the entire neighborhood. As for the ice melt itself, I'd bought more from Hendrickson Chemical Supply, batch number CX5891TG this time, carefully tracking the batch number in my records. The bags sat in my garage now, ready for the next winter storm. I'd considered buying them from a regular hardware store just to avoid any issues, but I'd decided against it. The commercial-grade stuff was better, and I wasn't going to let fear of theft dictate my purchasing decisions. Besides, I'd upgraded my security camera system after the incident. Now I had cameras covering every angle of my property, all recording to cloud storage. If anyone tried to steal from me again, I'd have crystal-clear footage. Tom Reinhardt stopped by one evening in early November, just as the first frost warning had been issued. We stood in my driveway, talking about winterizing our houses. "You know," Tom said, "the whole situation with Deborah, as messy as it was, ended up being good for the neighborhood. People are actually talking to each other now instead of living in fear of HOA violations. We're having a community Thanksgiving potluck next week. First time in years. You and Sarah should come. We'll be there," I promised. "And Marcus, I'm glad you handled everything the way you did. You could have been vindictive, could have tried to destroy Deborah completely. But you just wanted justice and fairness. That's the kind of neighbor this community needs." After Tom left, I stood in my driveway for a few more minutes, looking at my house and my beautiful Japanese maple, now bare of leaves for the winter but strong and healthy. In the spring, it would bloom again, red leaves unfurling in the warming sun. It had survived its first year despite the controversy, and it would be here for decades to come. A reminder that sometimes you had to stand your ground for what was right, even when the opposition seemed overwhelming. I thought about the batch number, CX4472MB, that had made all the difference in my case. Without that tracer, without my scientific background and attention to detail, I might never have been able to prove the ice melt was mine. Deborah could have denied everything, and it would have been her word against mine. But science didn't lie. Chemical signatures didn't have agendas or grudges. The evidence had spoken for itself, clear and undeniable. It occurred to me that we could all benefit from having batch numbers in life, ways to trace things back to their origins and prove the truth. How many disputes and conflicts came down to he said, she said, with no way to verify what really happened. I'd gotten lucky with the ice melt. I'd gotten lucky with my security camera catching just enough of the theft to be useful. I'd gotten lucky with my meticulous record keeping and my scientific background. But not everyone had those advantages, and not every wrong could be proven and righted. Still, the case had reinforced my belief in the importance of documentation and evidence. In a world where accusations could be made easily and reputations destroyed quickly, having proof mattered more than ever. I made a mental note to keep up my habit of documenting purchases, keeping receipts, and maintaining my security system. It wasn't paranoia, it was prudence. Sarah arrived with a bottle of wine and a bright smile, and I pushed thoughts of Deborah and the HOA drama out of my mind. We cooked dinner together, laughing about her day at work and making plans for Thanksgiving. Later, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she leaned against me and said, I'm really happy here, Marcus. With you in this house, in this neighborhood, it feels like home. It is home, I agreed, kissing the top of her head. And it's only going to get better. The winter came on slowly that year, with snow falling in late November and continuing through December. I used my ice melt liberally, keeping my driveway and walkway clear and safe. No one stole from me again. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable rhythm of holiday decorations, friendly waves, and occasional get-togethers. Tom proved to be an excellent HOA president, handling issues with common sense and diplomacy rather than rigid enforcement of outdated rules. In January, almost exactly a year after the theft that started everything, I received a card in the mail. It was from Emily Patterson, Deborah's daughter. Inside was a photo of Deborah at the homeless shelter where she was doing her community service, serving food to a line of people. She looked tired but genuinely happy, smiling as she ladled soup into bowls. A note from Emily read, "Thought you'd like to see how she's doing. She's found purpose again. Thank you for giving her a chance to find her way back." I put the photo on my refrigerator, a reminder of how far we'd all come. The story that had started with stolen ice melt and a batch number had ended with redemption, forgiveness, and growth. Not just for Deborah, but for me too. I'd learned to stand up for myself without being cruel. I'd learned that justice could be achieved without vengeance. And I'd learned that people were capable of change, even when they'd seemed irredeemable. As I stood in my kitchen that evening looking at the photo, I thought about all the batch numbers in my life. The choices I'd made, the actions I'd taken, the paths I'd chosen. Each one traceable back to a decision, a moment, a point of origin. The batch number that led me to Naperville after my divorce. The batch number that led me to buy this house in Willowbrook Estates. The batch number that led me to plant a Japanese maple that wasn't on the approved list. And yes, the batch number CX4472MB that led me through a conflict that ultimately made me stronger and my community better. We were all walking around with invisible batch numbers, markers of our experiences and choices. And sometimes, when things went wrong, those batch numbers were the only way to trace back to the truth and set things right again. I was grateful for mine. Grateful for the scientific mind that noticed details and kept records. Grateful for the chance to prove what was true and hold someone accountable while still showing compassion. Spring arrived again, and my Japanese maple bloomed brilliantly. Its red leaves a stunning contrast against the blue sky. Sarah and I got engaged in April, and we started planning a small wedding for the fall. The neighborhood threw us an engagement party at the clubhouse, and the turnout was incredible. Even people I'd barely spoken to came and congratulated us, brought gifts, shared stories and laughter. Tom gave a toast at the party. "To Marcus and Sarah," he said, raising his glass. Marcus taught us all an important lesson last year about standing up for what's right while still showing grace. He could have destroyed someone, but instead, he gave them a chance to rebuild. That's the kind of character we need in this community, and I'm proud to call him a neighbor and a friend. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. I felt a wave of emotion, grateful for how things had turned out, grateful for the community that had rallied around me, grateful for Sarah and the future we were building together. Later that night, after the party had ended and we were walking home under the stars, Sarah asked me about the whole Deborah situation. I told her the basics when we first met, but she wanted to hear the full story. I walked her through everything. The stolen ice melt, the batch number, the confrontation, the false police report, the criminal charges, and the eventual resolution. "That's incredible," she said when I finished. "The batch number being traceable, I mean. What are the odds?" Pretty slim, I admitted. If I'd bought regular ice melt from a hardware store, I never could have proven it was mine. The whole thing would have played out differently. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been able to prove it? Sometimes. I probably would have let it go, written off the $200 as a loss. But then the tree issue would have continued, Deborah would have kept harassing me, and eventually I might have been forced to move. Or maybe I would have sued the HOA. Either way, it would have been worse for everyone involved. So, in a weird way, your scientific background and that batch number saved you. And maybe saved Deborah too, I said. If she'd gotten away with the theft and the false report, she would have kept spiraling. The consequences forced her to confront her behavior and get help. It was harsh, but it was necessary. We reached our house, and I looked up at it with affection. This was home. This was where Sarah and I would build our life together, where we'd maybe raise kids someday, where we'd grow old. And it all might have been lost if not for a batch number on a bag of ice melt. The wedding took place in October, a beautiful fall ceremony with golden leaves falling around us. We kept it small, just close friends and family, and held the reception at a restaurant in downtown Naperville. It was perfect. As we danced our first dance as husband and wife, I caught sight of Tom and Linda from the HOA board sitting at a table, smiling at us. This community that had been the source of so much stress a year and a half ago had become truly home, filled with people who cared about us and supported us. The years passed quickly after that. Sarah and I settled into married life, both of us advancing in our careers. I continued working as a chemist, and she thrived as a teacher at a local elementary school. We talked about starting a family and decided to wait a few more years. The neighborhood continued to flourish under Tom's leadership, and when he stepped down as HOA president after 4 years, the position went to Patricia Holmes, who maintained the same reasonable, common-sense approach. I never heard from Deborah again directly, though I occasionally got updates through the neighborhood grapevine. She and Gerald stayed in their downtown condo, and by all accounts, she was doing well. She'd finished her community service and probation without incident, had continued therapy, and had found work as a volunteer coordinator for a nonprofit. The person she'd become was apparently nothing like the rigid, controlling HOA president I'd clashed with. People could change, I learned. Sometimes they needed to hit rock bottom first, but change was possible. My Japanese maple grew taller and fuller with each passing year, a constant reminder of where it all started. Every spring when it bloomed, I thought about the fight to keep it, the ice melt that got stolen, the batch number that proved the truth. It seemed almost ridiculous now that so much drama could have sprung from something so mundane, but that's how life worked sometimes. Small actions had big consequences. A moment of angry theft spiraled into criminal charges. A refusal to back down about a tree led to a complete change in HOA leadership. 10 years after the incident, Sarah and I were sitting on our front porch on a warm May evening, watching our 5-year-old daughter play in the yard. The Japanese maple provided shade for her little tea party setup, and she was serving invisible tea to her stuffed animals arranged carefully on a blanket beneath its branches. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Sarah asked, echoing her question from years ago. "All the time," I said. "If Deborah hadn't stolen that ice melt, if I hadn't been able to prove it, if the HOA hadn't changed leadership, any of those variables shift, and maybe we're not sitting here right now. Maybe I moved away years ago, we never met, our daughter doesn't exist." That's terrifying to think about. And amazing, I added, because it means everything matters. Every choice, every action, every batch number, they all trace back and connect and create the life we end up with. Our daughter called out to us, asking if we wanted to join her tea party. We walked across the lawn and sat down on the blanket beneath the Japanese maple, accepting cups of air and plates of invisible cookies. This was the life I'd fought for when I refused to remove that tree, when I insisted on justice for the stolen ice melt, when I stood my ground against an overbearing HOA president. This peace, this happiness, this family, it had all been worth it. The batch number CX4472MB had faded into history. Those 2 bags of ice melt long since spread across driveways and melted into groundwater. But the impact of that batch number lived on in every aspect of my life. It had been the key that unlocked the truth, and the truth had set everything in motion. Justice, accountability, change, growth, and ultimately, a life better than I could have imagined. As I sipped imaginary tea with my daughter under the red-leafed canopy of my Japanese maple, I thought about all the batch numbers in the world, waiting to be traced back to their origins. Evidence waiting to tell its story. Truth waiting to be proven. And I was grateful that when my moment came, when I needed proof and justice, I had the batch number to show the way. It was a small thing, really, just a number on a bag. But sometimes the smallest things made all the difference in the world.